Well, joining us now, pleased to catch up with him as he is wrapping up his time on this week's crop tour. Ted Seifried, Zaner Ag Hedge, is with us to give us a recap of what he found out on tour. Ted, always good to talk with you, buddy. I hope you're doing well, and looks like happily out of the heat and out of the dryness there from walking in fields this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Every crop tour is different. This was
Yeah.
a rather challenging one from the standpoint of heat. It was, yeah, when we were finishing up our run yesterday, headed into Iowa City or Corville, it was 102 air temp, but the feels like or index was 122, and that was something else, man. I was soaked. But to my knowledge, we all managed to stay hydrated, and we all made it through it. Got the stops done. I think we got normal, if not maybe more than normal, number of stops done. So yeah, no, it was a great tour, really good tour. There was a whole lot of question marks coming into this tour. You listen to what people say on Twitter, and if you fully listen to Twitter, you were expecting this to be like just not quite as bad as 2012, but pretty close. And that's not what it was, but certainly wasn't a perfect crop either. So yeah, no, it was interesting. And I mean, that's why we do these things. I really like to get out there and see for myself, what's going on and what we have. And it's the best way I can do that, covering 5 states in 4 days, basically. So yeah, that's good stuff.
Well, let's dissect what you saw a little bit. I know you went on the eastern leg of the tour, and you've been going west for quite a few years, so you got to see some new scenery this time around. And starting in Ohio on Monday, and then working your way to Rochester, Minnesota. I mean, walk us through what you see as far as corn and soybeans there. Day one, day two, it sounded like decent yields in the eastern corn belt.
Yeah, Ohio was the surprise to the upside. We were all pretty impressed with Ohio. For Ohio standards, they were really quite good. In fact, the Ohio numbers came out better than the Indiana numbers, which was the biggest disappointment. They haven't officially released Iowa numbers. So to this point, Indiana's been the biggest disappointment. But yeah, Ohio was solid. What you're seeing in Ohio was some rather immature corn from a standpoint of really everything you're seeing everywhere else, but also, Ohio's usually a little bit behind, say, Iowa, but they're quite a bit more so behind, which makes the big rains that they got Wednesday night into Thursday a very big deal for Ohio, because those yields that we were talking about, whenever we're looking at an immature crop, we're talking about potential. Well, after the rain that happened Wednesday night into Thursday, that potential, I think, becomes reality. And I'd almost venture to guess that we might end up having to see that Ohio number go up a little bit, specifically for the soybeans, right? You had a whole lot of really flat pods, very high pod count in Ohio for soybeans, but you had a lot of flat pods that needed a rain to get the job done. And well, guess what? You threw a bunch of rain on that. So Ohio is sitting very, very pretty after this week. And I actually think the heat that they had leading up to that rain, Wednesday into Tuesday into Wednesday, they didn't have the excessive heat like they saw on the western half or even central. But they needed that heat to kind of push that crop further along into maturity or towards maturity, and then throw the rains on top of that. Nearly ideal for Ohio. Really, really. Indiana, day two. Well, end day one and then beginning of day two. Yeah, man, Indiana. The USDA has Indiana really at a very high number. They're talking record for corn, and we just didn't see it. Indiana numbers came in not only below last year, but below the 3-year average. I mean, we didn't see that record. And so I think that was a big surprise to the downside. I don't think Ohio has enough acreage to make up for Indiana, or has enough of an increase in yield. It'll help offset it some. I wouldn't be surprised if the USDA sees it a little bit differently than us. Again, we don't cover the entire state and so on and so forth. But yeah, no, Indiana was disappointing. day 3, when we were talking, we had already done half of Illinois, and then we were going to do the rest of Illinois and then get into Iowa. Day 3, I was hearing really negative things about Illinois. My route through Western Illinois, which was we went through Macomb, Illinois, which is where I went to college, so that was kind of cool. But really I had high expectations. Now I knew that they had weather problems. I mean, certainly we know hot and dry. I mean, that's been a nationwide thing, but no, they had derecho issues. I mean, they had a really significant derecho do damage to a lot of structures and things like that. A lot of down corn, but that was fairly early in the season. And my thought was that, hey, that corn's going to come back up and it should do pretty well. And the answer to that is it did come back mostly, but it didn't do all that well. The yields that I was getting in Western Illinois, which is usually some of the best yields in the world for that matter, it just wasn't really there. I mean, mid 180s in places that have APHs between 210s and 220. So that was a disappointment. But then the Illinois numbers came out last night and they were solid. I mean, better than last year, better than the 3-year average, and really kind of puts Illinois in a position to live up to the USDA's expectations and possibly might even justify a little bit more. So I think in my book, Illinois was a surprise to the upside. Not necessarily a surprise in terms of what my pre-tour expectations were, but a surprise in terms of what I had been hearing other scouts saying, what I saw in Illinois. So that was a good surprise.
How about Iowa, Ted? As you mentioned some question marks about Illinois there as you guys move into Iowa there on Thursday, well, part of Wednesday and then into Thursday, and finish up going to Rochester, Minnesota. I've heard some chatter, some folks a little concerned about Eastern Iowa. So what did you guys find there?
Yeah, well, first of all, Western Iowa didn't come out all that great because we did see, we saw some of the Iowa numbers yesterday, and that was a big surprise. Again, as you mentioned, I've been on the Western tour the last 7 years, and ran the same route in the West the last 4 years straight, and the car that was running my route this year, I was getting updates from them throughout the day, and it was shocking. I thought it was going to be as good, if not a little bit better than what we saw last year, but it came in 15 to 20 bushels light for corn, and pod counts were down. Beans didn't fare quite as bad, but corn was surprisingly low in Western Iowa. My route in Eastern Iowa, I was in Southeastern Iowa. I crossed at Fort Madison, which is the lowest entry port into Iowa from Illinois. And I took a bunch of samples in Lee County, which is sandy ground. It's usually not that great, but they had really fantastic yields. There was some amazing corn down there because they got a lot of rain, and those sandy soils were actually a big benefit to them this year as opposed to detriment. So Southeastern Iowa is really good. Actually, I think Eastern Iowa is going to try very hard to pull up the disappointment in the western part of Iowa. I don't think it's going to fully do it. You had the northeastern portion. There's these two dark red spots on a drought monitor, and those were very evident as we got through them today. My route today, basically straight shot up to Rochester, 30 miles west from Iowa City, and then really just straight up to Rochester, right by Cedar Falls and Waterloo.
Yep, that kind of that Highway 63 kind of route then, basically, Ted.
Yeah, that's right, Jesse. Just slightly west of 63 was about as far east as my route would allow. We kept drifting that way and pulling ourselves back. But yeah, it started out really well. Saw some right out of the gun in Iowa County. Saw some really good corn. 190, 202. There was a 167, but that was more of I think a management issue than anything else. But then we got into the 247s, 217, 227. 247 again, those tied my highs, and that was Benton was good. Tama was where it started to get really good. Grundy was really good. Tama and Grundy were the winners by today. But then we start getting into like Butler, and this is now the dry area, and kind of the rest of the route was rough. Not a complete disaster. Well, there were some fields that were bad, but I wouldn't say complete disaster. I mean, we're not talking 2012 type proportions, but really not good corn, for Iowa, for ground that you can, just like when we were talking about Western Illinois, 210, 220 APH, and you're pulling 170s. Man, that's not what you want to see. So yeah, I'm very curious to see how I'm gonna do it. How the variability in Iowa is going to play out on the numbers tonight. It's the most overused. It's the most overused word on Crop Tour Week, Jesse. I try to stop myself from doing it, but today actually really justified it. We've actually kind of made a drinking game out of that word, but yeah, so now I got to drink for my own self.
Well, I was going to say too, looking at your route, you got about 15 minutes away from my hometown there today. So you were in my old stomping grounds, and I've seen some of that crop there, kind of Floyd County area, Butler County area. Few questions, a little bit of variability, as we'll use the word again. But Ted, overall, just to kind of sum things up, as you guys got up to Rochester, looked at Minnesota a little bit, and really just overall, your thoughts, anything that you think that does it feel like that any of the findings on the tour could potentially sway the markets in a major way moving forward into next week, or what do you think here, Ted?
I've been thinking about that a lot. In the last hour or so, as we kind of finished, we don't do, the East doesn't take any pulls in Minnesota. So the last, 45 minutes of the drive is just deadhead. And I've been thinking about that a lot. I think to get a really bullish reaction for corn, we would have need to see something that suggested that the USDA was 5 to 6 or 7 bushels too high on their yield. I don't think we saw that. I think what we saw is going to justify people in saying that the USDA is too high, but I don't know. In my mind right now, I'm thinking kind of like a 171.5 to a 173, somewhere in that neighborhood. But that doesn't get the balance sheet tight enough to get excited in my book. And it doesn't really stop me from saying that I think we still have more work to do to put in harvest lows. That's my thought at the moment. Again, I really like to see these Iowa numbers because that's obviously a big piece of the puzzle. But like I said, I mean, I had to put a lot of thought to that because, again, Western Iowa was a big disappointment. What I heard from Minnesota, what the West saw in Minnesota today, big disappointment. And Minnesota was the biggest question mark for me in the West going in. That Western Iowa and Minnesota. So, yeah, again, I'd like to see the numbers tonight to really confirm my thoughts. But at the moment, I'm thinking, yeah, it's lower than the USDA, but it's not a 165, or 168. Sure. Right. And I think for us to get really excited about corn and a tight balance sheet and things like that, we'd have to be in the 160s.
Well, Ted, we do appreciate the thoughts and recap of this week's tour. And as always, my friend, I thank you. We'll let you go relax a little bit and enjoy a much needed time in the air conditioning. We appreciate it, my friend. Thank you for the time today.
I've got the room down to 68 right now. It's great.
And by the way, too, I know folks can find you online, Zaner.com. You can check out you guys' Ag Hedge newsletter, I believe. They can find you on X, formerly Twitter, as well. A lot of great ways to get in touch with you, isn't there, Ted?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, what we're doing now too is I'm recording about a 5-minute market recap. This week has been a tour recap, and I'm going to do that just after we're done here. But I'm going to be doing that every day, so you can awesome. You can register for that, so then you get notified when that happens. And then you can find me on the X. I still call it Twitter. I've not started.
I call it Twitter too, but I'm trying to get in the habit of calling it X.
Yeah, I guess we should try that. Yeah. I'm at the Ted Spread. And if you want to go back and see. I pretty much, I think I did over 50% of my stops, or right around 50% of my stops. I put them on Twitter. You can see the corn cobs that I'm pulling. This is a little nubbin. You can see the stuff that I'm pulling. You can see the math. A lot of times I'll show the math as well if I have time to do it. So you can really go in and kind of get in depth and kind of follow along with what we saw too.
Sure.
So yeah.
You should show it as well. You showed me before we went on the air. You got a fat boy. ear that you pulled as
So
well.
look at this. Well, and the other thing I wanted to say, and the reason why I brought it up to the room to show you is, I mean, okay, so this got pulled off a couple hours ago. So the amount of denting that you see here is a little bit exaggerated at this point. But this was a fairly mature corn cob when I pulled it. The other really cool thing about this one, it's 22 around. It's short. It's a shorty, but it's 22 around, and it weighs a ton. It's cool. You don't see 22 rounds very often.
No.
I've really only seen a couple of them in my 9 years of doing the tour. And I only saw 4 20 rounds on this. So the 22 for me was kind of special. And then the one last one I'll show you was the pollination issues that we had were very evident, in a lot of stuff, but then it still made some really good corn. This is a really solid, nice corn cob. And again, it's been out of the field for a while, so it's shrunk down and dented up a little bit more than it was when it came out. But man, pollination issues were there, but then so was the corn. It was kind of an interesting combination.
With that, Ted Seifried and Zaner Ag Hedge, we appreciate the tour recap. We will let you go, and we will talk to you soon, my friend. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Jesse. You take care. We'll talk to you soon.